We fled along with the 130,000 other South Vietnamese refugees in 1975, and I'm pretty sure almost all of them were deeply anti-communist because many of them came from the political and military classes. My parents were actually merchants, so they were not a part of the politics or the military, but they were still very anti-communist because they were Catholic. And so I grew up steeped in anti-communism and in Catholicism in Vietnamese refugee communities. And I felt that we were a community that had lost so much. People felt they had lost a country. Many people, including my own, had left family members behind. There was a lot of melancholy, rage, anger, bitterness, sadness, the whole gamut of emotions. And out of that, people were still trying to rebuild their lives, their shattered lives. So I just remember growing up with an awareness of how much was at stake here, that because we had lost so much and we were trying to rebuild, I was watching my parents work 12 to 14-hour days almost every day of the year in their grocery store. And that experience was very similar to what everybody else was undergoing at the same time. And we also, for many of us, had to worry about the relatives we had left behind. So my parents were also sending money back as early as they possibly could. And there was this sense that we were still tied to Vietnam, even though we've been cut off from it as well.
And I mean, what sort of connection, what brought you together with the members, the relatives that were back in Vietnam, and what drove you apart? When did you see points of, sort of engagement and tension?
I think it was a very tragic situation. I was too young to remember this, but my mother, soon after she came to the United States, her own mother died. Can you imagine your mother dying and you're separated by thousands of miles and you're not there to mourn her? It was devastating for her. And she ended up, in a psychiatric facility because of that. And she did recover eventually. But stories like that, I think, were not unusual at all. Life went on back in Vietnam, and that meant life and death. And everything had to be experienced vicariously. And it would take time before people could start communicating with each other because communications were cut off.
How would you say the average American misunderstood what you were going through, misunderstood the impact of the war?
You have to understand that in 1975, I believe that surveys revealed that the majority of Americans did not want to accept refugees from Southeast Asia. So that's Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. I think there were a lot of misperceptions of who Southeast Asians were because the exposure that Americans had to these countries were purely through the ideas of war. They were seeing the country through, photos, television reportage, movies, and so on. And Vietnamese people did not appear, I think, in a very complicated fashion in these representations. We were victims, or we were the Viet Cong, and so on. And all of these things were saturated with a whole legacy of racism and Orientalism that Americans were already bringing to their idea of Asia in general. So there was a lot of obstacles to overcome for Americans to really understand the new Southeast Asian refugees among them as human beings. And so I think there was a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of incomprehension, just as Americans were unaware of the complexities of the cultures of the countries of Southeast Asia that they were getting involved in. Southeast Asian refugees coming into new American communities would also find similar levels of incomprehension. It was one thing to end up in California, which we were lucky to do, but imagine ending up in Minnesota or Wisconsin or other parts of the country that had very little exposure to Asians. It was a challenging experience all around.